Police and CEO Jaems chase the mastermind. Is Tu Diep safe? The city no longer slept in peace. Shadows lingered even in broad daylight, and beneath the polished world of business deals and press conferences, danger stirred quietly. After months of betrayal, sabotage, and the collapse of his company, CEO Jaems now had only one thing on his mind: catching the real mastermind behind it all. But even more urgent than justice was a fear that clawed at his chest. Was Tu Diep safe? She wasn't just his love. She was the light that had kept him sane in the darkest nights. Every moment she smiled, every time she held his hand, she unknowingly pieced him back together. But now, she could be the next target. The police had begun working closely with Jaems after his bold move, revealing the hidden audio that exposed Jean's true identity and drug trafficking operations. The recordings had shaken the legal system, sparking an investigation far beyond James's ruined business. Yet the real puppet master was still out there, and he was watching. One rainy evening, just as Jaems left the precinct after another long briefing with the investigators, his phone lit up. Unknown number. If you care about her, stop digging. Jaems froze, his breath caught in his throat. For a moment, the rain didn't even seem to fall anymore. His hand trembled as he pressed redial. No answer. The screen turned black again, leaving only one thought screaming in his head: Tu Diep. Without hesitation, Jaems raced through the city streets. Her small home near the farm was quiet, too quiet. When he burst through the gate, his heart nearly stopped. The door was ajar, and the lights were still on. Tu Diep, he shouted, panic cracking in his voice. And then, Jaems, her voice came from the kitchen. She stepped out, holding a bowl of soup, eyes wide with surprise and concern. Relief washed over him so fast it made him weak. He dropped to his knees and held her as if the world would rip them apart any second. What happened? She whispered. He couldn't tell her everything, not yet. But he held her tighter and murmured, I thought I lost you. That night, Jaems made a decision. He would no longer let her be a pawn in someone else's game. The police would continue their hunt for the mastermind. But Jaems, he would protect Tu Diep with everything he had, even if it meant sacrificing his own freedom, his wealth, or his life. Because love, when tested by fire, either breaks or becomes unbreakable. And Jaems was ready to fight until the very end. The night was long, but Jaems didn't sleep. He sat by the window of Tu Diep's house, one hand wrapped around a cold cup of tea she had made for him, the other clenched tightly on his lap. Outside, the wind rustled the banana trees she often harvested from, a simple life that had somehow become entangled in the cruel game of revenge and power. Tu Diep had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from worry. She didn't ask too many questions, only offered warmth, as she always did. But Jaems knew danger was closing in. The next morning, at the police headquarters, Inspector Lam entered the room with urgency. Jaems stood to meet him. We traced the call, Lam said. It was bounced through 5 countries, but the origin leads back to someone named Trin Van Kai, former business associate of your father. James's jaw tightened. That name had not been spoken in his home for years. His father had once mentioned him, brilliant, ambitious, and dangerously resentful. Rumors said Kai had lost everything because of a shady land deal orchestrated by James's family. If Kai was the true mastermind, everything made sense. The sabotage, the financial collapse, the threats. He's not just after me, Jaems said slowly. He wants to destroy my family legacy, and everyone tied to it, the inspector added grimly. Meanwhile, back at the village, Tu Diep stepped outside to feed her chickens, unaware that someone was watching from the distance. A man in a dark coat, with a faint scar along his cheek, made a call from behind the tree line. She's still here. Do I take her now? A cold voice responded on the other end. Not yet. Let Jaems suffer first. Back to Jaems, He rushed back to the village after a gut feeling he couldn't shake off. As he pulled into the driveway, he saw Tu Diep outside, humming softly, placing fresh vegetables into a basket. The relief he felt was immediate, but something in the wind felt wrong. "We need to leave," he said as he approached her. "Now, why?" She looked confused, concern growing in her eyes. "Because I love you," James said, voice shaking, "and someone out there knows that. They'll hurt you to get to me." For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she placed her hand gently on his chest. "I'm not leaving you. If we run together. If we fight together." Her words struck him like lightning, not because of fear, but because of love. Pure, brave, and unwavering. Somewhere in the city, Kai watched their every move through a camera hidden in a streetlight near her home. His eyes narrowed. "Let them run," he whispered. "The game has just begun." The chase begins, love on the run. James didn't waste a second. He packed a small bag with essentials and grabbed Tu Diep's hand tightly. There was no time to explain everything, only enough time to act. His heart raced as he looked at her. She was strong, but innocent, and he feared the storm that was coming would be far too cruel for someone like her. They drove in silence through narrow backroads, far away from the village, far from the people they loved. As the sun began to rise behind them, painting the sky in gentle gold, James finally spoke. "His name is Kai. He's dangerous, and he's after me, after everything my father built." Tu Diep remained quiet. Then she looked at him with those deep, steady eyes. "I don't care about who he is. I only care about staying beside you." James's grip on the wheel tightened. Her words were simple, but they cut through the fear and exhaustion in his chest like light, through fog. At a hidden cabin, they arrived at an old cabin in the mountains, owned by one of James's late mentors. The place was quiet, safe for now. Tu Diep set up the kitchen, boiled water, and tried to act normal, but the way her hands trembled as she held the kettle told a different story. James came from behind, wrapped his arms around her waist, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I dragged you into this." "No," she said firmly. "You didn't drag me. I chose to walk beside you." The enemy moves. Back in the city, Kai paced in front of a wall of monitors. Every step was calculated, every breath laced with fury. "They've gone into hiding, just like cowards. Should we send someone to the mountains?" his assistant asked. "No, let them think they're safe." Meanwhile, release the news about James's arrest warrant. Let the world turn against him first. The headlines the next day were brutal. CEO Jaems wanted for fraud, an embezzlement and hydropower collapse. Where is he hiding? Anonymous whistleblower leaks audio of family corruption. A night of tears. At the cabin, James received a call from Tune, his most loyal staff. "James, it's all over the news. They're saying you're a criminal. Investors are pulling out again. And John might be cooperating with Kai." James didn't speak. He simply ended the call and stared into the fire. Tu Diep sat beside him quietly. Then, without saying a word, she took his hand and placed it over her heart. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. "As long as it beats for you, you're not alone." That night, James cried for the first time in years, not from fear, but from love, and the pain of knowing the world wanted to destroy the one thing he finally cherished. Whispers of war, allies in the shadows. The morning mist hung heavy outside the cabin. James hadn't slept, neither had Tu Diep, but they didn't speak of fear anymore, only of strategy. James leaned over a map laid across the rustic table. Red pins marked past betrayal. Blue lines traced hidden contacts. Tu Diep watched him, noticing the weight pressing down on his shoulders. The once proud CEO was now a man fighting for more than reputation. He was fighting for truth, for family, and for her. Suddenly, a knock shattered the silence. James moved instantly, reaching for the old revolver his mentor had left behind. Tu Diep stood still, her breath frozen in her lungs. But when the door opened, It was Tune, bruised, tired, but alive. They followed me. I led them off your trail. But James, they know you're still alive. You have maybe 3 days, no more. James helped Tune inside. The loyalty in the man's eyes gave James a flicker of hope. Maybe not all was lost. The secret within, that night, as the wind howled outside, Tu Diep stood by the window, staring into the darkness. James came up behind her. "Do you regret staying with me?" he asked gently. She turned to face him, eyes shimmering. "No, but I'm afraid for you. I'm afraid that all this pain, all these lies, will change the man I love." James looked away, ashamed. Maybe I'm already changing. Tu Diep walked closer, cupping his face with both hands. "Then let me be your reminder of who you were, of who you still are." Their lips met, not in desperation, but in defiance. In that moment, love became armor. An old flame returns. The next morning brought a surprise they hadn't planned for. Min, the once peaceful CEO who had left everything to play guitar on city streets, appeared at the door. His eyes were tired, his heart clearly still caught between business and passion. "I heard what happened," he said simply. "I didn't come to fight over her," he added with a glance at Tu Diep. "I came to help you clear your name." James didn't know whether to trust him, but time was running out. "Why would you help me?" James asked. "Because I once loved someone who was destroyed by men like Kai," Min answered. "And I swore I wouldn't stand by the next time I saw it happen." Rising from the ashes, together, the three of them, James, Tu Diep, and Min, planned the next step. They would expose Kai not with violence, but with truth. The secret USB tune had hidden, the audio James had recorded in the hospital, the paper trail of fraudulent transfers, everything was ready. They just needed one more thing, a public moment. A press conference, an ambush of evidence, a storm they would walk into together. But would the world listen? Would the truth come out before Kai made his final move? And most of all, would Tu Diep survive the fire that was about to rain down? In the storm of betrayal, chaos, and shattered trust, we learn that love is not measured by comfort, but by resilience. Tu Diep and James stood against misunderstandings, danger, and heartbreak, but in the end, they discovered something far more powerful than success or wealth, loyalty, truth, and the courage to hold on when it's easier to let go. Sometimes, people walk into our lives with unclear intentions, and not everyone is who they seem to be. But rather than hardening our hearts, we must learn to see beyond appearances, to forgive, and to believe in the people we love, even when doubt tries to break us apart. The greatest strength is not in fighting alone, but in choosing to stand beside someone. Even when the world falls apart, this story teaches us that even in the darkest hour, a flicker of love, trust, and integrity can guide us home.